Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We are continuing our study of the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to read verses 1 through 11. Verses 1 through 8 is poetry. We've talked before about just the beauty of the language of this book. It is a beauty that survives translation in any language, so far as I know. I mean, it certainly survives into English, and this is perhaps the most beautiful language in the passage, in the book. Of course, there are other places as well, but when he waxes poetic, Solomon, when he waxes poetic, man, he's just unsurpassed in the beauty of his language and in his skill as a communicator. We've talked about the fact that this experiment is conducted in a closed loop. The time is a circle. Time is also a line, and we experience time as both a circle and a line. We just do. And we talk about time as a circle and a line. We talk about things going around and coming around. We literally experience time as a circle. On my analog watch, it goes around in a circle. The Earth turns on its axis. It rotates around the sun, which rotates around the supermassive black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. But time is also a line, from birth to death, from yesterday to today to tomorrow. If the Milky Way galaxy and the stars in it are expanding outward from the center of the universe, which Mr. Hubble told us more than 100 years ago. So, in all but the last 2 verses of this book, we have time as a line. And nowhere has this been communicated, time as a circle, excuse me. And nowhere in human literature has this been communicated more beautifully than in these verses. For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time for peace. Or love, and a time for hate, excuse me. A time for war, and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? He's restating his question, but in a little more positive terms. I have seen the business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. We're going to stop right there. Solomon finally sees not the striving after the wind, the circle as being pointless, but as having a point, because it's God's circle. That God has placed us in this circle of time. And everything that God has given us to do is beautiful in its time. It's beautiful in its time. That there is a purpose there's a purpose to every matter under heaven, a time and a purpose to everything. We start with birth and we end in peace. Now that is in itself significant. It's beautiful the way he encompasses everything. Time, life and death, seed time and harvest, and our internal emotional life. To weep and to laugh, to mourn and to dance. We get the weeping and the laughing. And Khalil Gibran in the Prophet famously says that your laughter and your tears come from the same well inside you, And the more that you expand your capacity to do one, the more you expand your capacity to do the other. I think that's awfully wise observation. A time to mourn and a time to dance. I just love that those two are juxtaposed as opposites, because we think of mourning and losing and just holding on and holding tight, making ourselves small, trying to hold things in. Dancing is letting go, just absolutely letting go, and opening yourself up. Cast away stones and gather stones together. Why would you throw a stone? You're throwing it at someone or at something. Why would you gather stones together? Or maybe you're clearing a field, or maybe you're building a house, but it's a group effort. You know, it's like on the American frontier, a barn. He's taking us to a barn raising, or a field clearing. You know, where neighbors come together and work together. And so these couplets, these pairs, excuse me, which are gathered together in couplets, just encompass everything in the human experience. And he says that the parts of the human experience have their proper place and time. Sin itself, we live in a sinful world, and we live foolish lives, and therefore we upset the balance of the circle that God has placed us in while we're here. But there's something else that's important, and this is, he says, God has put eternity in our hearts. We know that time is more than just a loop. It's more than a closed loop. There's a line, there's a trajectory that takes us to something permanent, that will take us out of the circle altogether. We know that it exists, but we know nothing about it, and we don't know how to get to it, because God has kept it from us so far. And that's something interesting for him to say. We'll talk more about this later on, but his father believed in eternity and that he had a place in it. And if you don't remember that, think about that, don't agree with that, or don't remember that, just read the last verse of Psalm 23. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We'll talk more about David and his belief in eternity versus Solomon, and his keeping it out of the equation as we continue our study. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We'll pick up with verse 12 next time.